Anne Boleyn arrived at Henry's court fired up with radical ideas. She grew up here at Hever Castle in Kent, the daughter of Lady Elizabeth Howard and an ambitious diplomat, Thomas Boleyn. Thomas secured his younger daughter a coveted position as maid of honour in the French court. And it was there that Anne was introduced to the new ideas that were transforming Europe.
During those years, she came in contact with evangelical Protestants, people who were rethinking old verities, who were coming up with new ways of approaching everything, including faith.
What were these perhaps contentious new religious ideas that Anne was picking up in France?
A key one is the source of authority. So when you're making decisions about religious matters, who do you look to as the authority on that matter? Whether it's the Bible, Scripture, which is what these evangelicals were arguing, or whether you turn to the wisdom of the church. And followers of Luther said that actually the church was flawed, that the Pope was fallible.
Do you think Henry would have taken these ideas about the authority of the Pope to heart if it hadn't been for Anne?
I think Anne's pivotal because we know that Henry hates Luther. Anne obviously had a real hold on his heart and so could introduce ideas to him that other people couldn't possibly say.
And is this something that's been downplayed by the people who see her as just a sex pot?
I think that comes down to pretty misogynistic ways of seeing Henry VIII's wives in the past, actually, and that it's much easier if you can sort of boil them down to being a bit of skirt and not really anything more. And actually, with Anne, we do have something more. She is somebody who makes a massive difference in terms of English history. We could argue that Henry VIII would not have broken with the Roman Catholic Church if it weren't for Anne's influence.
Anne was at court for several years before she turned the king's head. But when she did, Henry became besotted with her. They weren't lovers yet. Instead, in the private moments they had together, Anne took the opportunity to introduce Henry to a radical Protestant book. The book Anne's showing Henry is called The Obedience of a Christian Man by William Tyndale, the Protestant scholar. Now, this book is controversial. You might even call it seditious. Tyndale's seen as a heretic by the Catholic Church because his book implies that kings have lost their power to the Church. Anne's taken a serious risk smuggling this book out of France and into England, and then she's been bold enough to put it under Henry's nose. She's even marked a special passage for him to read.
Kings, they are but shadows, vain names and things idle, having nothing to do in the world, but if our Holy Father needeth their help. This is a book that me and all kings should read.
The little interaction shows Anne beginning to persuade the king that maybe not all radical Protestants are bad, and that maybe breaking with Rome could hold advantages from them both. Anne was winning Henry round to some Protestant ideas. And she refused to sleep with the king until he'd made her his new queen. But there were many obstacles in her way. Henry was still married, and his wife had many supporters at court. Eustace Chapuis was devoted to Charles V, who just happened to be the nephew of Catherine of Aragon. Chapuis really loved Catherine of Aragon. It was said that he venerated her like a saint. And partly as a result of this, he really hated Anne Boleyn. In his letters to Charles V, Chapuis describes Anne as more Lutheran than Luther, and he slut-shamed her. He called her the concubine and the whore. And Chapuis really set up this image of Anne that does survive to this day as the wicked, evil seductress, as the original other woman. Anne's genuine intelligence and sense of political strategy just don't fit into this soap opera version of the story.
In 1532, Thomas Cromwell became Henry's chief minister. Unlike Henry, he was a radical Protestant who saw Luther as a progressive force. An ally of Anne Boleyn, he saw the king's great matter as an opportunity to advance the Protestant cause. So Cromwell began to weave some expert political propaganda. He assured Henry that there was a way to get him his divorce, improve his finances, and enhance his political power. It would just take 2 Acts of Parliament. The first was drafted in 1533.
This is the real, actual act in restraint of appeals. And because this act banned appealing to the Pope in ecclesiastical matters, it meant that Catherine was now banned from appealing to the Pope in her and Henry's great matter. From this point onwards, it would be Parliament, not the Pope, it would be London, not Rome, that would be the final authority on the constitutional affairs of England.
By this time, Anne had succumbed to Henry's advances. And in January 1533, before the act had even been passed, Anne discovered she was pregnant. To make sure a potential baby boy was legitimate, they quickly got married. Henry, who was still married to Catherine, was now a bigamist. The Pope expelled him from the Catholic Church. This guaranteed that Henry would burn in hell for eternity.
But Henry didn't seem to mind too much, because with Cromwell busy drafting his revolutionary acts, Henry seemed to feel that his powers were limitless.
A year later, Cromwell produced a second bill, the Act of Supremacy. This made Henry the supreme head of a new Church of England and severed all ties with Rome.
But how could he possibly justify this massive break with Rome? Well, the first clue comes in the very first line of the Act in Restraint of Appeals, where we begin to see Cromwell emerging as one of history's biggest fibbers. It says, "By diverse and sundry old authentic histories and chronicles, it's manifestly declared and expressed that this realm of England is an empire, governed by one supreme head and king having the dignity and royal estate of the imperial crown." What he's saying here is that Henry rules an empire. He is an emperor, as kings of England have been for centuries. And emperors are beholden to nobody, certainly not to the Pope. But where did this whole idea of empire come from? Who was Cromwell kidding?
The truth is that Henry had no empire beyond the British Isles, apart from a precarious foothold in Calais that was increasingly expensive to defend from the French. But Cromwell wasn't about to let facts like these get in the way of his master plan. To justify the passage of power from Rome to London, he manipulated English history.
This is the 12th century book that Cromwell used as his source and his justification. It's the history of the kings of Britain by a Welsh monk called Geoffrey of Monmouth. And in it, he takes the story of the kings of Britain right back to one of Britain's best-loved legends, King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. But this is really pseudo-history. It's more like a collection of fairy stories.
But these fairy stories were the diverse and sundry old authentic histories and chronicles Cromwell was relying upon for his claim that England really was an empire. The Queen might be able to spin Philip's disastrous attempt to dethrone her into an English victory, but secretly she was a long way off winning the war with Spain. Peace and unity come to England as the Spanish ships are broken by the storm. But that's just another big fib, because it's not the end of the story of the Spanish Armada. By the end of 1588, Elizabethan England was planning a counter-armada. The war with Spain was unfinished business. Around half of Philip's ships had made it home and were now being repaired. So in 1589, Sir Francis Drake led an attack on Spain. His orders were to destroy what was left of Spain's fleet, invade Spanish-owned Portugal, and put a Portuguese king on the throne. But the expedition failed. England's counter-armada was a disaster. Today, English people have forgotten the story of the counter-armada. Was it well known at the time, in the 16th century?
Cuando se produce la catástrofe de la contraarmada, fue muy conocido en Inglaterra. La catástrofe fue horrible. Más de 20.000 hombres, más de las 4/5 partes de los hombres que participaron en la expedición perdieron la vida. Claro que fue conocido en la Inglaterra de ese momento. Sin embargo, ya ese verano de 1589, panfletos exculpatorios, propagandísticos, para ocultar la catástrofe ante los ojos de la opinión pública inglesa y de la opinión pública europea.
The pamphlets downplayed the failure and denounced negative accounts of the expedition as malicious slander.
Hay que saber que Inglaterra e Isabel I supieron manejar muy bien la propaganda, mucho mejor que Felipe II.
Our propaganda was better, yes?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. En aquella época, España era un imperio universal. El imperio inglés aún no había nacido. Que no se puede decir que Inglaterra ganó la guerra. No se puede decir que Inglaterra hundió a la Armada Española. Estos son mitos creados para la forja de una identidad nacional, de un orgullo nacional.
So we English people, we like to think that England beat Spain. We won, but it's not that simple, is it?
No. De hecho, la Armada Española volvió a España y fue reparada. La contraarmada inglesa el año siguiente sufrió una catástrofe que duplica la de la Armada Española del año anterior. Y sobre eso se ha construido un relato nacionalista, mítico, inglés, totalmente intocable, sagrado. La contraarmada sería un estorbo para ese relato. La contraarmada ha desaparecido de los libros de historia ingleses por ese motivo.
In November 1588, Queen Elizabeth I held a procession through London. This was her victory parade. The Queen made her way through the city to St. Paul's to give thanks. God and his chosen special monarch together had saved the day. They were the hero and the heroine at the heart of this narrative. But in reality, though, things weren't quite so heroic. Elizabeth's promise at Tilbury to reward her soldiers proved to be empty rhetoric. The war had drained Elizabeth's coffers. The sailors who fought for England were hit by disease and were still fighting for their wages. The Crown threatened prison for those slanderously suggesting that they hadn't been paid. William Cecil now rubbed salt into the wound. He said Well, if the soldiers die of illness, then at least the crown won't have to pay them. By the end of 1588, more than half of the men who'd fought in the Armada campaign were dead, and they were killed not by the Spanish, but by disease and starvation. The reality of post-Armada England was economic crisis and an increasingly unpopular queen. It was time for a royal makeover. Elizabeth is now in her 50s, unmarried, and too old to produce the all-important heir to the throne. Her lustrous red locks have gone. Her face is pockmarked. More than ever, Elizabeth must conceal her frailties.
Elizabeth has to manufacture an image of eternal youth. She needs to present herself as something more than merely mortal. On goes the white lead makeup to cover up her smallpox scars, and a red wig to cover up her grey hair. This is Elizabeth I as the Virgin Queen. She's married, but only to her country. And this isn't just an image for her courtiers. Everyone in England will see this. It's like a Tudor profile pic. And the handle is Gloriana. What we're seeing here is the creation of an Elizabethan marketing campaign. Elizabeth had lots of different portraits of herself commissioned, and they were sent out across England, across Europe, and all of them were loaded with propaganda messages. They said that Queen Elizabeth I is pure, that she's powerful, that she's going to make England great again.